The Stuka dive bomber screamed overhead, its engine shrieking like a banshee as bullets ripped through the sand just inches from where they lay. Young Private Thompson clutched his wounded shoulder, his face pale as parchment, tears mixing with the grit and smoke that covered his cheeks. Around him, hundreds of British soldiers pressed their bodies against the cold, wet sand of Dunkirk beach, trapped between the advancing German army and the cold, gray waters of the English Channel. That's when he saw him, a figure in a dark uniform without a weapon, moving calmly through the chaos, kneeling beside the wounded, speaking words that somehow cut through the roar of engines and the thunder of artillery. The man's voice was steady, reassuring, as he looked directly into Thompson's frightened eyes and said something that would stay with the young soldier for the rest of his life. But what were those words? And who was this mysterious man who seemed to walk through hell itself without fear? Stay with me, dear friend, because tonight we're going to discover how one unarmed chaplain became the guardian angel of Dunkirk, saving more lives with his courage and compassion than entire battalions could with their guns. Welcome to War Stories by the Campfire, your nightly gathering place for the most inspirational true stories from the battlefields of history. I'm your host, and it doesn't matter if you're listening from a bustling city apartment in New York, a quiet farmhouse in the English countryside, or perhaps sitting under the stars in rural Australia. You found your way to our warm circle of storytelling tonight. Take just a moment to let us know in the comments below where you're tuning in from. We absolutely love hearing from our global family, and your comments help us understand how these timeless tales of human courage touch hearts around the world. Now then, settle back into your most comfortable spot. Adjust that pillow, pull up your favorite blanket, and let the gentle glow of our campfire draw you into a story that happened over 80 years ago, yet feels as immediate and powerful as if it were unfolding right before your eyes. Close your eyes and let your imagination carry you back to the late spring of 1940. Picture the northern coast of France, where the small port town of Dunkirk sits quietly beside the English Channel. By late May 1940, over 400,000 Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk. Behind them pressed the German army. Ahead of them stretched the cold waters of the English Channel, and above them, the Luftwaffe ruled the skies. The beaches stretched for miles, covered not with sunbathers and sandcastles, but with exhausted, frightened men who had been fighting and retreating for weeks. They formed long, snaking lines stretching from the dunes down to the water's edge, waiting for rescue ships that might never come. Among these desperate men moved our hero, though he would never have called himself that. Chaplain William Henderson was 42 years old, a gentle man from a small parish in Yorkshire who had volunteered to serve with the British Expeditionary Force, not because he wanted adventure or glory, but because he believed that in humanity's darkest hours, people needed spiritual comfort more than ever. Henderson was not a tall man, nor particularly imposing. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, prematurely gray hair that always seemed slightly disheveled, and hands that were soft from years of blessing bread rather than handling weapons. His uniform bore the simple cross of a military chaplain, the only badge he ever needed or wanted. On that gray morning of May 28th, as the evacuation of Dunkirk was beginning in earnest, Henderson received orders to join the priority evacuation of non-combat personnel. After all, what use was a chaplain in a military disaster? But as Henderson stood on those beaches, watching the faces of the men around him, some no older than his own son back home, he made a decision that would define not just his own legacy, but touched the lives of hundreds of soldiers in ways that bullets and bandages never could. He walked up to his commanding officer and said something that stopped the officer in his tracks. "I'm staying," Henderson said simply. "These men need me more than I need to go home." And so, while other non-combat personnel boarded the evacuation ships, Chaplain Henderson stayed behind, walking among the thousands of men who covered the beaches like a living carpet of khaki and desperation. Henderson's first stop was always the wounded. He knelt beside a young private who couldn't have been more than 19, a boy from London whose leg had been shattered by shrapnel. The boy was crying, not from pain, but from fear. "Chaplain," he whispered, "I don't think I'm going to make it home to see my mom." Henderson took the boy's hand in both of his own, and his voice carried that special quality that only comes from absolute sincerity. "Son," he said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother didn't just give birth to your body. She gave birth to your spirit, your courage, your capacity for love. And that part of you, the part that makes you who you really are, that part is already home with her right now." Word began to spread among the troops. "There's a chaplain," they would whisper to each other, "walking among us without fear. He doesn't have a weapon, but somehow he makes you feel safer than all the rifles in the world." As the hours passed and the German army drew closer, Henderson found himself organizing the men not just for evacuation, but for hope. He moved among the long lines of soldiers waiting for rescue ships, and wherever he found despair taking hold, he planted seeds of something stronger. He found a group of men from Manchester, sitting in dejected silence, convinced they would never see England again. Henderson sat down with them in the sand, and in his gentle Yorkshire accent, he began to tell them about the beaches of his childhood, about how the tide always comes in and always goes out, about how the darkest hour is always just before dawn. But then he did something unexpected. He asked them to tell him about their homes, their families, their dreams for after the war. And as these battle-weary men began to speak about the things they loved, something magical happened. The fear in their voices was replaced by determination. The despair in their eyes was replaced by resolve. Each evening, as the sun set over the channel, Henderson would find a spot on the beach and simply begin to speak. He didn't preach in the traditional sense. Instead, he talked about courage, about the things worth fighting for, about the fact that even in the darkest circumstances, human beings have the power to choose how they respond to their situation. Hundreds of men would gather around him. One evening, as German flares lit up the sky like deadly fireworks, Henderson stood before nearly 1,000 men and told them a story about a lighthouse keeper he had known as a child, an old man who tended a beacon on the Yorkshire coast. This lighthouse keeper, Henderson said, worked alone in all kinds of weather. And when children would ask him if he was ever afraid, the old man would smile and say something that I've never forgotten. He said, "Children, I'm not afraid of the storm because I know something the storm doesn't know. I know that my light is stronger than its darkness." The chaplain looked out at the sea of faces around him. "And each of you," he continued, "carries that same light. It's the light of your courage, your love for each other, your determination to see home again. And that light, gentlemen, is stronger than anything the enemy can throw at us." One of the most remarkable incidents occurred on May 30th, when German Stukas managed to break through and began dive bombing the crowded beach. As thousands of men dove for cover, Henderson did something that witnesses would never forget. Instead of diving for cover, he stood up and began to walk among the men who were lying on the ground. his voice calm and steady as he spoke words of comfort. The bombs fell around them, sending up great gouts of sand and shrapnel, but Henderson never flinched, never stopped moving among the men. When the attack was over, they looked at Henderson with something approaching awe. "How did you stay so calm?" one of them asked. Henderson's answer revealed everything about the man's character. "I wasn't being brave for me," he said. "I was being brave for you." Sometimes the most important thing we can do is show others that it's possible to face our fears and keep going. But perhaps Henderson's most significant contribution was organizing what became known as Henderson's Lines. Working with military officers, he established orderly groups led by hand-selected sergeants and corporals. Instead of letting men sit in fearful silence, he encouraged them to talk to each other, to share stories about home, to make plans for what they would do when they returned to England. The effect was remarkable. Instead of thousands of panicked individuals, the beach organized itself into a community of men looking out for each other. The evacuation proceeded more quickly and safely, and morale remained surprisingly high despite the desperate circumstances. Royal Navy Commander James Thompson later wrote, "The presence of Chaplain Henderson on the beaches was worth at least 2 additional destroyers in terms of efficiency and morale. His organization of the men saved countless lives." Day after day, Henderson worked tirelessly. He slept little, ate less, and never once complained. When officers suggested he should take a spot on an evacuation ship, he would simply smile and shake his head. "My work here isn't finished yet," he would say. "There are still men who need to know that they're not alone." June 2nd was the final day of evacuation. The German army was now less than 2 miles from the beach. Henderson had been working for over 100 hours with almost no rest, but he continued moving among the remaining men, still offering comfort, still organizing the final groups. Only when every wounded soldier was aboard, when every man who could be saved was given a place, did Henderson finally accept a spot on one of the final boats leaving the beach. But even crossing the channel, Henderson's work wasn't done. He moved among the men crowded into the small vessel, checking on the wounded, calming fears, helping everyone understand they were finally safe. Private Thompson, the young soldier from our opening, was on that same boat. Later, he would write, "The chaplain sat with us the whole way. Even though he was exhausted, even though he had given everything over the past week, he still had energy for one more conversation, one more word of encouragement." The official records show that Operation Dynamo successfully rescued 338,226 Allied soldiers from what had seemed like certain capture or death. But for the hundreds of men who had personal encounters with Chaplain Henderson, the real miracle was the discovery that even in humanity's darkest hour, there are people who choose compassion over self-preservation. Years after the war ended, when those soldiers had returned to their families and rebuilt their lives, many would still tell the story of the chaplain at Dunkirk. They would tell their children about the man who walked among them without fear, who reminded them of their own strength when they had forgotten it. Henderson continued serving as a military chaplain throughout the war, carrying with him the same philosophy that guided him at Dunkirk, that his job was not to make war easier, but to help people remember their humanity even in inhuman circumstances. After the war, Henderson returned to his small parish in Yorkshire, where he served quietly until retirement. He rarely spoke about Dunkirk, deflecting praise and insisting he had simply done what needed to be done. Henderson passed away peacefully in 1967. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including many men who had traveled from across Britain to pay respects to the chaplain who had touched their lives at Dunkirk. And so we return to that moment where our story began, to young Private Thompson, watching as an unarmed chaplain moved calmly through the chaos of war. The words that Henderson spoke to him that day were simple but profound. Son, you are going home. Not just to a place, but to people who love you. And the love they have for you, the love you have for them, that's something no enemy can ever touch. Hold on to that love, and it will carry you through anything. Thompson did hold on to that love, becoming living proof of the truth Henderson discovered at Dunkirk, that the human spirit, when reminded of what it truly is indestructible. Henderson's weapon was not steel or explosives. It was something far more powerful, the simple recognition that every person has infinite worth, that every soul carries a light stronger than any darkness, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is help each other remember who we really are. Perhaps that's a lesson we can all carry with us. We all have the power to be chaplains in our own way, to offer comfort to those around us who might be struggling, to help others remember their own strength and worth. The real memorial to Chaplain Henderson is not carved in stone. It's carried in the hearts of all those who understand that our highest calling is to help each other find light in the darkness, hope in despair, and the courage to keep going, even when the path ahead seems impossible. If this story has touched your heart tonight, if it's reminded you of something important about the power of human compassion and courage, I hope you'll take a moment to hit that like button. It's completely free, and it helps us continue bringing these inspiring true stories to you each night. And here's something I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever encountered someone who, like Chaplain Henderson, showed extraordinary kindness or courage during a difficult time in your life? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. Until next time, this has been War Stories by the Campfire. We release videos every single day, bringing you the most inspiring true stories from history's battlefields. So if you'd like to join our ranks and march alongside us on this journey through history's most remarkable tales, just tap that subscribe button and answer the call to courage. Remember, courage isn't always about the battles we fight with weapons. Sometimes the greatest courage is found in the battles we fight with love, compassion, and the simple determination to help each other find our way home. Sleep well, and we'll see you tomorrow night, right here by the campfire.